Yes, so I have given you a book. And this will be one of our core textbooks for the course. And it's written by some colleagues of mine. And I think that it's really foundational for your growth, for our growth. And you will be able to use it not only for your own development, but also for helping others to develop as well. So it has lots and lots of tools and practices and insights, and it articulates growth and development and integral in a very, very clear way. And I think that you'll get a lot out of it if you haven't read it already. So let's talk a little bit about an integral transformative practice. And so a core takeaway for you through this course is going to be the construction and execution of your own integral transformative practice. And I'll explain what that is in just a little bit and how we do it. But that's really going to be one of the real grooves that I hope to lay down over the next few months in your experience here that you will continue with far beyond your engagement with this course. And it is something that is a lifelong practice of essentially bringing out the best of who you are in all of the big ways that we show up here: body, mind, spirit, and shadow. So let's talk a little bit about this. So what I'm going to do essentially is give maybe a 25-minute lecture on integral transformative practice and how to build it. And then we're actually going to then turn it around after going through questions and stuff like that, and how do you start drafting your own based upon your current practices and the gaps that you see, and we'll begin to articulate that, and then you'll take it home and work on it and continue to refine it throughout the course, and obviously continue to actually engage in it. So, building an integral transformative practice. What in the world is an integral transformative practice? I like Ken's quote here, which is that an integral transformative practice is the conscious exercise of body, mind, and spirit in self, culture, and nature. The conscious exercise of body, mind, and spirit in self, culture, and nature. You break that apart, and you can see that that you're focusing on these big three dimensions of your being: your body, we're aware of that; our mind, we're aware of that; and our spirit, we're aware of that. And how do we actually engage them and work with them? That's the foundation of an integral transformative practice. However, it's also about then taking these big elements of ourselves to better understand ourselves. So better understanding your physical body and your mind and the games that it plays and your personality and the sort of tricks that it does to help you get ahead or help you trip yourself up. And then also engaging in your own spirit and understanding what that is, or understanding the mystery that it is. But it's not just about focusing on you, so that's the self part, but it's also taking it out into your culture, whether it's your work culture, or whether it's your community, or whether it's your family, and showing up with all of these different dimensions of yourself, and even supporting the growth and development of other people if they're hungry for it. And then in nature as well. So it's not just engaging with other people, but it's also engaging with the systems and the structures and the ecosystems that we have in service of helping it all to develop. Because not only is yourself developing, but our culture is developing, and all of nature, all of reality is developing essentially. And technically it's all happening, developing in the moment. Every moment is kind of dying and being recreated. And so we have an opportunity to create those initial conditions that support the development of self, culture, and nature. And one of the most powerful ways to do it is really to engage in your own integral transformative practice. So I've said this in a little bit more layman's terms, which is really an integrated practice to deeply develop the essential elements of yourself in service of self-authoring your own transformation, and I would add there in service of supporting the transformation of society and the world as a whole. And so the four main elements here that I'm referring to are body, mind, spirit, and shadow, which we'll talk about in just a little bit. So why engage in an integral transformative practice? There are lots of reasons, but let me just speak for me personally why it's been so useful. For much of my life, I was operated largely from here up, kind of a cognitive, mental sort of dude. And I all of a sudden, after a while, realized that if I don't take care of my body, then my head doesn't have a place to hang out. And I also started to realize that if that my head can't figure everything out, right? I can't wrap my mind around complexity and the way organizations really are and really the mystery of humans. I can't really figure it out. So my mind the rational mind kind of breaks down a little bit. And you start to realize that we're actually getting information and knowledge from our body. And we'll work on this with the embodied leadership piece, but also from our spirit. So there are these sources of knowledge, which you're all aware of, whether it's your gut feeling or intuition, that are beyond our rational mind. And so for me, by more actively engaging in the development of my body, not only do I have increased vitality and energy and even look better to my wife, then I also kind of get more in touch with from here down. And I'm able to kind of sense, what do the different aches and pains actually mean. Maybe they're just because I was sitting in a bad position, or maybe because there's something else that's kind of stuck inside me that's maybe an old emotional wound that needs some movement to kind of physically move through me. And then my own exploration around my spiritual growth really has been one of the most joyous experiences of my life, because of how it's helped me to recognize that I'm more than just my body and more than just my mind. And I'm more than this individual here. And by being able to ground in that, as you all know, it then provides us with a deeper space from which to relate to another person, or to take ourselves not quite so seriously, or to bring together important change projects. And so that depth of foundation for me brings all of the meaning and the joy and the peace and the creativity that makes life rich and worthwhile and exciting to be here. And I largely attribute that to the engagement that I've had in my own spiritual practice. And so there are benefits at a physical level of an integral transformative practice, in that you'll just get in better shape, lose weight, tone your body, get more in touch with what's actually happening, increase stamina, flexibility, strength. There are mental benefits of an integral transformative practice, in that we're challenging ourselves to take our mind to new areas, to continue to push it to understand complexity, or continue to push it to let go of trying to figure things out, for example. And then there are tremendous benefits spiritually as well, in my experience. And there's all sorts of research and data on the benefits of contemplative practices in general, around how it increases your your peace and sense of mind and provides you with a calmness and greater capacity to kind of be present and aware of what's arising, in addition to actually the health benefits of having less physical stress in your body and having less sort of mental turmoil that's tearing you up and causing you to have blinders as you go through the day, right? So there's lots and lots and lots of benefits of a spiritual practice. I'm not going to get into those now, but I'm happy to share with you the research that's out there. So what we're going to focus on really kind of the practical of actually getting this stuff built, and you go try it out for yourself and see how it works for you. So there's 4 essential modules to this: body, mind, spirit, and soul. Body, mind, spirit, and shadow. And the body component of an integral transformative practice can take a variety of different shapes. So basically what we're talking about here is basically creating a series of practices that you're going to engage in on a regular basis that works with your body and works with your mind and works with your spirit and works with your shadow. And so there are lots of different dimensions of body, mind, spirit, and shadow. And this document it covers a lot of the different territory. Fundamentally, with body, you can work on your strength, which is your physical strength of your muscles. You can work on your stamina, which has to do with your heart's ability to kind of run at a rapid rate and pump blood and stay engaged in long-term running, for example. That's an example of really building your stamina. And you can work on flexibility. So stretching, yoga, those are the 3 pillars of your physical development: strength, flexibility, stamina. And so things like resistance training or weightlifting is incredibly powerful for your strength development. And there's interesting research, initial research, that suggests that weightlifting actually gives you the body of what you were 12 years ago. So like if you have a regular weightlifting practice, I'm 38 and I technically, as I develop my weightlifting practice, can maintain a 26, 27, 28-year-old body, and you can do the same. There's all sorts of little biomarkers that people are able to measure that basically say, this is what this is how your body is physically aging, right? And these biomarkers change as you age. And so they've gone in and measured people who do resistance training on a regular basis, and it doesn't mean needing to get all bulked up. It just means to be regularly breaking down the cells in your muscles so that new muscle cells are created. And so the biomarkers are based upon looking closely at the cell. So it makes sense that when you are breaking down a muscle cell and creating a new one, that when you go in and look at your muscle cells, they look younger because they are, right? And so it's, of course, more sophisticated than that. But that's one of the huge advantages, is essentially your body becomes more supple and stronger, and you're able to look and actually be physically younger. So that's the strength piece. The stamina piece is engaging in things like running and things that will get your cardiovascular rate up high. It could be dance. It could be vigorous housework. It could be vigorous lovemaking. There's lots of different ways to work on your stamina. And however you want to design your practice, you can incorporate that. But it's good to have a stamina piece as well in that. Stamina? Yeah, so stamina is like, do you know what an elk is? The animal that is able to essentially run up mountains as cougars or mountain lions are chasing after it, and basically it has so much stamina because it can just keep on running up the mountain and keep going, and the cougar just can't eventually keep on running the whole time, right? So that's the classic Native American image of stamina is this elk that's able to really outpace the mountain lion that's chasing after it. And so it's your ability to just keep on going. Winston Churchill at one point said, if you're going through hell, just keep on going, right? And so that's an example of stamina, right? And then the final piece is flexibility. And so there's lots of different ways to engage in flexibility. Yoga happens to be my favorite way because it's so integral in nature. But regularly stretching does wonders for your body because of the way that it also keeps your tendons that much looser and that much more supple, so that you don't encounter as many aches and pains and so on and so forth. You guys know the benefits of doing exercise. I don't need to go into it, but it's working on the body is a core element of integral life practice, integral transformative practice. The next element, which is working with the mind, this has to do with, there's a number of different dimensions around this. One, there's just the very practice of studying more and learning in detail about areas that you're passionate about. So from a career standpoint, for example, if you want to become a master in your field, it only takes about 10 years. If you spend 10 years reading and studying what is the leading edge in that field, all the journals, going to the conferences, connecting with the leading practitioners, in 10 years you can be world class. That's all it takes. It's about 10,000 hours of practice, right? And so that a big part of that is actually kind of studying and learning and standing on the shoulders of giants, of people that have spent 20 years doing something, and you get to buy a book for 20 euros and learn their key nuggets of knowledge, right? And so a huge part of continuing to develop yourself really is engaging in studying in the areas that you're most passionate about. And of course, practicing it. But like I know that Caroline, for example, has read dozens of books that are related to intuitive intelligence, right? It's really an area of interest for her, and she's studied that a lot. But it's also, the mental piece also has to do with taking perspectives and being able to literally step in the shoes of someone else and understand the way that they're seeing the world. And this has to do with more mental agility and not being stuck in the way that you see it, not being trapped in your own unique way of seeing the world. Honoring that, but also essentially being willing to let go of it in service of really understanding the perspective of the other stakeholder in the sustainability initiative that you're working with, or your partner, or your child, or anybody that you engage with. And a real sort of core practice for the integral community and integral transformative practice is that of perspective taking. And I will, on a regular basis, invite you to take a different perspective on something. And as you invite yourself to be taking the different perspectives of people that you engage with, you essentially are strengthening that muscle, that perspective-taking muscle. Because ultimately we want to be able to argue and defend the oppositional statements as strongly as we can make our own arguments, right? If we really know them, if we really understand them. You know this from the work that you've done around negotiations around climate change issues, right? That you need to know the opposition's argument as well as your own in service of advancing it, right? So, catch up with Carolyn at some point, because she actually, for a number of years, really had to take a very deep perspective from a political standpoint because she was representing the Flemish government in climate change negotiations. And she actually experienced that that wasn't her authentic position, but she had to represent this government position. And so it was this really powerful perspective-taking process that she went through, and sort of fascinating stories coming out of that. So finally, there's, within mental development, there's this whole realm of, it's not necessarily what you know, but it's how you know what you know. Meaning, as it turns out, how you know information about a sustainability initiative, how you actually interpret it, is what I mean by how you know. How you are interpreting it is actually as important, if not more important, than what the information is. So let me give you an example. So I've been tracking very closely this situation in Cote d'Ivoire, where Laurent Gbagbo is the president that lost the election 4 months ago, decided that he wasn't going to give up power after 10 years, and essentially the entire international community moved against him, and he's at the final dying breath of his institution as the opposition's army has swept across the country, and he's holed up in his palace bunker as we speak, right? So if I look at that situation of the fact of the president of Cote d'Ivoire is holed up in his basement with his palace on fire, and he's fighting to stay in power, that's just a fact, right? Now, how I interpret that has a radical implications for what I then do with that information. So if I interpret it from a very nationalistic and even sort of egocentric, power-driven place where that's my president and these are the foreign forces that are coming in supported by the French and the UN, and they're just trying to colonize us and force us to change our country, and I'm going to go fight against them, then I might actually take that data point and walk out the door and pick up a gun as a 17-year-old kid and just go start shooting people, right? That's a very different interpretation of a industry baron who is in charge of getting hundreds of thousands of tons of cocoa out of Cote d'Ivoire, say an executive from Cargill, who looks at that same fact and goes, okay, I need to be doing scenario planning right now to figure out how to get the cocoa out no matter who stays in power. And I need to be setting up political relationships in a way that don't hurt my company, while at the same time ensuring that I can still supply cocoa to my suppliers, because if I don't get it, my competitors are going to get it, right? Very different set of actions based from a different way of interpreting the situation. Same fact, different worldviews, different actions. So mental development is absolutely crucial to being a more effective sustainability leader, especially in the realm of changing how you know what you know. And that's this whole area of action logics that we've been talking about, right? And that's what this course is really fundamentally geared toward, is helping you to create the conditions to self-author your own development of your action logic. So really changing the way that you actually interpret situations, because there is greater power and creativity and flexibility and access to information as you are able to know things from a broader perspective. The spirit module is also profoundly important to this work. And I'll tell you straight up, basically, I've studied a lot of sustainability leaders, and I've been around lots of leaders who hold a whole variety of different ways of seeing the world. And the bottom line is that the ones that I've come across and the ones that I've studied that are actually have the latest action logics, meaning that they've developed the most in the way that they make meaning and the way that their worldview is, those that have kind of gone to the farthest limits of what science can measure with respect to how are they making meaning and how do they understand the world, those folks, without exception, all have a spiritual practice. All have a spiritual practice. I've never found someone who was able to self-author their development into these later stages of consciousness that hadn't along the way realized that they are more than just their individual rational mind, and that they are more than just this agent operating in a random universe showing up. What tends to happen to people in this developmental process, especially I think in a secular society like the Netherlands, is that children at youth will often have some sort of experience, potentially, with a religious institution. And they may not, if their parents are very secular themselves. And even that in itself kind of gives a message to the children that my parents aren't into this, and so it's not the right thing to do. And then, but maybe they're young and grandmother takes them to church on a regular basis, or takes them to their grandfather takes them to the mosque, or they learn to do meditation with their uncle or something like that, right? There's some sort of indoctrination to a particular religious path. And then as consciousness develops, it tends to essentially go through a stage where it interprets religion as old-fashioned, kind of not up to speed with current modern world, full of myths and legends and essentially all these rules and dogma that don't really fit with this new sort of emerging flexible me. And so people tend to go into a secular place and understand that really, if I'm going to make a real decision, it should be rational, it should be based upon science, or it should be based upon good reasoning, and I'm not going to make that decision because the Quran tells me so, or because the Bible tells me so, or because I'll go to hell if I don't, right? People go, not playing that game anymore. And so oftentimes people will then spend years and years and years in this sort of secular space. For whatever reason, it turns out that there is an invitation that happens to people to step into a recognition of spirituality in their lives and in the world around them that is beyond the traditional religious practices and religious institutions that they had grown up with. And so that was the whole rise of the humanistic movement and the human potential movement and the emergence of New Age spirituality, the movement largely of Eastern religions to the West, where people were able to engage more deeply with Buddhism or Hinduism, the rise of organizations like Shambhala that focus on a non-sectoral, non-religious practice of spirituality. And so people have an opportunity to essentially step into these new ways of having a relationship to something that's bigger than they are. And some people choose to step into that and adopt it. You, for example, have been on a Zen practice since 92, since 92, right? Spend some time with Patrick. He spent a year in retreat doing his practice deeply, moved his whole family to be doing depth work with his teacher. And so some people choose to do that and some people don't. And everybody has a right, obviously, to choose to do what they want. And my point is that if this is an area that you're kind of on the edge about, and this is a moment in this course when you're like, oh, this is a little uncomfortable because I don't like talking about this, then my only point is that by stepping into a spiritual practice, whatever it is that really fits with you, and there's thousands of them, and one certainly does fit with you, if not thousands, then it serves as an unlocking mechanism for your own growth and development. Like, it really can unlock tremendous capacity to get beyond the rational mind. So we'll be experimenting with some different ways of understanding spirit a little bit later on today. Finally, shadow. So this whole realm of shadow, this really has to do with the unconscious, or the aspects of ourselves that we have disowned or buried or kind of shoved deep into our psychological selves. So this is traditionally the work of psychotherapy. However, practices have arisen that enable just an ordinary Joe and Jane, you and me, to actually work with these dimensions of ourselves without needing to pay $50,000 in psychotherapy. And so we'll teach the most effective practice that we've come across so far, and I can turn you on to lots of resources around how to work with the shadow as well. But we'll be playing with it. And so there are, but the bottom line around shadow is that it's basically trapped light. It's trapped parts of ourselves that aren't able to get out and want to come out. And it will come and undercut us and kind of do work behind the scenes to pull the rug out from underneath us and help us do self-sabotage work and stuff like that. So, for example, I have shadow issues around authority and control, and I think that was largely because of not having grown up with a healthy authority figure as a father that was able to demonstrate to me kind of what healthy respect for authority is. And so when I'm confronted with authority and kind of needing to toe the line, it brings up shadow issues for me where I react and contract around it. And so I'll push away from it, or I'll fight back against it in an unhealthy way, when it may just be a legitimate sort of line management authority that is being asked of me, or it may be someone who actually has something really authentically useful to say that I should be listening to. So, but when that shadow stuff starts getting triggered in me, my blinders come on, and I'm not really able to see very well, and I'm not able to be centered very well, and I may say things or do things that are not coming from the best me, right? And I've seen it happen in multiple jobs, and so it's something that I'm aware of is a pattern that I work with, right? So, and these shadow stuff shows up all over sustainability work. It's all over leadership. Everybody's got shadow stuff, and everybody's projecting it out onto the world and getting irritated about things. Basically, anything that's happening out there that you're irritated about is shadow stuff. It's kind of as simple as that, right? If I show up in a way that's like irritating to you, it has a lot more to do with the way that you see the world than what I'm actually doing. And so we'll work with the shadow stuff going forward here. Here's the beautiful thing about an integral transformative practice, is that if you think about it, body, and mind and spirit are just different facets of us. We have this gross component, we have this sort of subtle mental component, and we have this causal or transpersonal component as well, spiritual. But there's really not any hard lines between any of that stuff. No one's ever been able to find the demarcation between body and mind, right? It's the whole body-mind question, which is throughout the literature. And the same thing between mind and spirit, or between spirit and body. Difficult to actually find a line. So consider yourself like a diamond, but these are just different facets of yourself. As you would expect, if it's all connected, then if you develop one part of it, if I push on one part of myself, the rest, other parts of it move too, right? So these are kind of connected, the book's there, and they move, right? So the theory around integral transformative practice, and there's not a rigorous science around this. I'm not going to pretend to you that this has been empirically proven. But the theory essentially is that as you develop one aspect of yourself, it actually helps the rest of yourself to develop as well. Meaning that if you're doing meditation or prayer or some sort of contemplative practice, the depth of mindfulness that arises, the capacity to be more mindful, actually helps you to be a better weightlifter, or it helps you to think more clearly because you're able to concentrate, for example, that much better. In the same way, by focusing very intensely on weightlifting and becoming a very good sort of resistance training person where you're very mindful and focused and you are pushing the limits on a regular basis, you're developing your volition or your will, right? And your will then also has to do with your mind. And so you're able to then work harder at problems. You're able to stick it out when it gets tough. It has to do with your emotional responses, right? You're in a tough emotional situation. If your will becomes very strong because you've practiced it from weightlifting and going to the very last little bit that you can lift and holding it there for 10 seconds until you collapse, right? Then that's a capacity that then rolls into not only your mental practice, but also your spiritual practice. And there's actually is some research that has found that people who meditate and weightlift are better weightlifters and better meditators than those who just weightlift or those who just meditate. And I'm happy to share that research with you if you'd like to take a deeper dive into it. So basically, by doing this cross-training, you get all sorts of synergistic advantages. It basically helps you to accelerate development in all of these areas if you're regularly touching in on them. So let's get into actually how to create an integral transformative practice. It's pretty simple. All of you are doing some sort of practices already. You're studying something. You may every now and then be going to the gym. Most of us are biking on a regular basis, and that counts. And we're all in relationship and paying attention to kind of our stuff that comes up that gets in the way of relationship. We're all doing stuff like that already. Okay, so the way that we build an integral transformative practice is not to clear the slates and try everything, start all fresh again, but really look at what are you already doing on a regular or semi-regular or I wish it was regular basis. And then get clear about, well, where are there gaps? Where am I not doing strength training or stamina training or flexibility training from a body perspective? Maybe I'm not doing shadow work. Maybe I'm not doing as much spiritual work as I'd like to. So just get clear about where are there gaps. And there's very legitimate reasons for those gaps being there, right? This is not a judgmental thing of, I need to whip myself and do my integral transformative practice, and I'm not a good enough human being if I'm not becoming the superhuman. This is not what this is about, right? This is about getting clear about what am I doing now. There's this full spectrum of these major dimensions of myself that are pretty important to take care of. Am I hungry to take care of them? Do I have actual commitment and will to? Well, then let's start creating a life where I can take care of them in a way that also fits with me being a busy professional, being a parent, wanting not to be 100% pushing all the time, right? Having a life. It's possible to really create an integral transformative practice that works with your life. It doesn't have to turn your life upside down. And so then checking in with what is your degree of commitment and what are the specific practices that you want to take on that will help you to fill those gaps. And then finally, actually practicing diligently, and to the extent that you can practice together with people, that also helps out as well. So my particular integral transformative practice is that I do weightlifting. I have a weight bench at home that I just pull out and weight. So I don't go to a gym, but I do it at home. And then I do yoga. So those are my body practices mostly. And then my mental practice is that I spend an awful lot of time studying for work and reading. In this case, I'm reading a fair amount of Hinduism, actually. I'm reading the Bhagavad Gita right now, which is it's like the Hindu Bible, because I'm interested. 5,000 years of knowledge, might as well see what they have to say, right? And then I'm just a curious person around perspectives. It's interesting for me to kind of understand where someone's coming from and see if I can hold that perspective. And as long as they're not too much of an authority figure, then I'm pretty good at it. And then finally, my spiritual practice is meditation, and then doing what I can to get to retreats, and then just being mindful in the moment. So in meetings, being aware that shadow stuff is coming up. So this is kind of a spiritual approach to working with shadow stuff, meaning that I notice when I'm contracting in a meeting and work on it in the moment using this, using a practice that I have of essentially noticing it, trying to understand its origin, allowing it to be, and then stepping into a new way of being with response to it. And so my practice is around those four areas: body, mind, spirit, and shadow. And you'll find when you get into the Integral Life Practice book that it's actually, you can develop practices in a whole variety of different areas: ethics, sexuality, relationships, so on and so forth. So it doesn't just have to be only these four. If there are really other areas that you want to develop, your own moral development, for example, then there's examples of practices and resources that you can draw upon and stuff like that. So we're not going to work on that now. I'll let you explore that. But what I want to do is essentially take some time now to have you articulate for yourself what are my current practices in these four areas: body, mind, spirit, and shadow, and where are their gaps, and then evaluate your commitment to those areas, and just begin to sketch some new practices. It doesn't have to be your final practice, but we're going to take about 15 minutes for you to work on this now, and then we'll come back. And so does anybody have any questions or comments at this point? What I'd like you to come back with is essentially clarity around what are your current practices in body, mind, spirit, and shadow? Where are their gaps? What sort of commitment do you have? It's okay if you say, you know what, not interested in working on shadow stuff. Bored by it, scared to death by it, totally okay. And then begin to think about some practices that might work in there, and then we can work with you to help you articulate it further. And this has a bunch of practice examples on it that you can draw from. Okay? Does anybody have any questions? Yeah. So your question is where's the heart component of this, and also where does this deeper presence that you have experienced and been able to access, where does that fit in with all of this? Is that what you're asking? Yes, so absolutely the heart component is a huge component of this. Emotional work is a huge element of this. And the way that I see this fitting in is, so there are physical aspects of emotions, meaning we feel our heart racing when we're scared. There are also mental, and so there is also neurochemical stuff happening with emotions. We're getting zapped by serotonin if we're blissed out. We've got a bunch of adrenaline running through our system. So there's a real body component of emotions. There's a mental component of emotions, meaning there's the story that we're telling ourselves that I'm not good enough, or I should kick the crap out of that person, or whatever, that is driving the internal development of those emotions. And sometimes that story we're not even aware of. So there's a mental component of the emotions. And then there's a spiritual component to emotions as well, which really, I think, gets into the deeper compassion that arises, or the deeper love that arises for other, whether it's your partner or for someone that you just have this deep respect for, or you're in a space where anybody can show up in front of you and you recognize the divine nature of them and are just in love with them, right? Not in a physical, attractive way, but just in love with their being. That's sourcing from spirit, in my opinion, right? And so, as you know, in the big mind process, there's big mind and there's big heart, right? And so, please, I really appreciate you questioning about that, because the emotional and the heart component is a huge element of what's here for us. And you can develop practices around working with your emotions. There's, of course, the whole field of emotional intelligence, which is very related to leadership. And that has to do with being aware of the emotions that are arising in you and self-managing them, and then being aware of the emotions that are arising in others and working to support their management of them as well. And so, great question. But yeah, if there are big elements of yourself that you don't feel are showing up in this, then ask or recognize that there's room for it all. Yeah, please. Yeah, great. So I really like what you articulated around using your body and your mind and your spirit to actually give you insight into what practices might be appropriate for you. I think that's brilliant. And I do encourage you to not treat this as a process for trying to become some sort of superhuman and pushing yourself to essentially not honor what you really are. We want to go to the level of eustress, not distress. And so holding who you are now and accepting that what you are is actually already good enough. And if you want to take yourself in different directions in life, then invite yourself into that, but not from a guilt place, or I should, or I need to, if I'm going to be in this course, or anything like that. If that stuff is coming up for you, that's shadow work that you have an opportunity to play with. So let's take some time and do this inquiry yourselves, and then I'll just come around and let you know. Any final questions or anything like that? Okay. I want to add one last subtlety to this. It's okay to think in seasons of your life, meaning you don't need to be pushing all of these dimensions to their max all the time. You can say, I'm going to be in the best physical shape of my life from a strength perspective by July 4th. That's what I'm doing this year, right? And then in the summer, when it's warmer, I'm going to focus more on the stamina stuff because I can be outside playing Frisbee. And But during the winter, it's going to be just the biking that I do, right? I'm not going to do heavy stamina training during the winter, because it just doesn't really work for me that well, because I don't want to go to a gym and run on a treadmill. So don't feel like you need to be pushing yourself, maxing out on all of these all the time. You could say, you know what? I want to do a big boost of yoga in the fall. That's really when it works with my schedule. And so I'm going to pull out some other things. I'm going to do 3 times a week practice or whatever. Or I want to do a retreat for contemplative prayer or for big mind or Shambhala practice. And so I'm going to organize around that and intensify around that over the winter.